Life deals us cards. In fact, life deals us a hand, right? There's 52 cards in a deck, and we don't get the whole deck. We play our hands.
Produced by Podcast Architects.
You're listening to the Lead On podcast, where we discuss experiences in the armed forces while exploring lessons from military leaders.
Welcome back. It's 2024 and the first episode of the year of Lead On, Lessons from Military Leaders, a podcast coming to you from the Enlisted Leadership Foundation. I'm David Dearie, president of the Enlisted Leadership Foundation. I'm very thrilled today, not only to start podcasting once again for the year, but I have two new guests, and it's our first husband and wife team to join us, a couple Marine veterans, Kory and Chelsey Gray. Thanks for being here, guys. How are you today?
Thanks for having us.
Such a pleasure.
Well, we met a few weeks ago at a networking event that a mutual friend of ours puts on over in Oceanside, California. And Chelsey and Kory were sharing a little bit about their Vetrepreneur or entrepreneur experiences and something that they're trying to do after coming out of the Marines 4 years ago. And I thought, you know what? I would love to bring them on the show and introduce them to all of you and just hear what they're doing, what they learned in their service to our country, and then how they took those experiences. Specifically, we're going to talk about servant leadership and some of the servant leadership styles that they observed and were treated with, some positive, some negative. And yes, because there could be negative servant leadership experiences, especially from those that don't understand, or they may think that a servant leader is you serve me, the leader. So we'll explore a little bit of that, and then I want you guys to share what you're doing and about your businesses. But before we dive into that, I always like to start off the podcast with just a question. And we drew straws ahead of time, and Kory, you're going to get the first opening question, and Chelsey, at the end of the episode, you'll get the closing. So, Kory, as leaders, and leader doesn't mean a retired command master chief, sergeant major, like myself, command master chief. I'm not a sergeant major, just the relations. But it could be a leader, it could be an E4, an E3, somebody in a position of some level of authority. So, in your experience, whether it's military or civilian, what is the worst piece of leadership advice that someone ever gave you?
Well, it's honestly, a really simple piece of advice, and I'll expand a little bit on it. But basically, it's do as I say, not as I do. Going back to the servant leadership style, leading from the front is good, but also having a personal mentor and somebody there to coach you, somebody who's there right beside you, is always something that I had always desired and wanted to strive for. And whenever a leader says, do as I say, not as I do, it's kind of a red flag for me. So that's a piece of advice that I think would probably be the worst.
And I don't know if, listen, I've made and continue to make my share of leadership mistakes. I don't think personally I ever said to somebody, do as I say, not as I do. In fact, I would wonder how many actually say that. But, it's pretty obvious by the way people approach things or their conduct, if that's their leadership style. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely.
And I'm sure neither of you ever did that yourself, because enough of us in the more senior positions, we did plenty of it for you. So great. So Chelsey, so you tell us about, well, first, let us know a little bit about, where you're from, why the Marine Corps, and then I'll go over to Kory and let you do the same.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm from a not so small town in Wyoming called Casper, but it's one of the second biggest towns there besides Cheyenne. And I grew up really wanting to have a greater impact, but I was searching for that through sports and dance, and then also through maybe going in the medical field. And due to life's circumstances or the cards that I was dealt, trying to look at going into college wasn't necessarily the best option for me financially. And with broken home situations and everything, I really was like, what else is out there for me? Because if I stay in this state, I'm either going to go to jail, get into drugs, get somebody else's kid. I don't know. Like there's nothing out there really, but just nothingness for someone who is trying to make a name or get out there. And so I walked into the mall and I didn't even know the differences between branches. Actually, that's how little I knew about the military, but I knew that was the only option for me to get out of that state. And so I walked into the Marine Corps office and I said, "Hey, Staff Sergeant so and so actually like messaged me on Facebook," and they're like, "Oh no, that's the Army. But since you're already here, we would love to talk to you, because most people don't really walk in their offices very much." But the staff sergeant that was there, he shared with me about what his experience was. And obviously recruiters, they have their own version of the Marine Corps that they tell you. So that way they'll get you to join. And I was a sucker from the first day once they started telling me that I could get school paid for, I could go travel, I could meet new people, go do these things and be a part of the greater vision of what the Marine Corps meant. And that's what led me to meeting my husband and getting in the military. So that's a little
Look
short.
at that. You met new people. You can't
people.
knock the recruiter for that.
He did.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, good. Wow. So, and I love what you said. The cards you were dealt, because life deals us cards, and not just, in fact, life deals us a hand, right? There's 52 cards in a deck, and we don't get the whole deck. We play our hands, and sometimes we got to fold them, but sometimes the hand we get is pretty good. And I venture to say the hand that you were dealt, at least in the core, that brought you and Kory together, wasn't a bad hand.
Not too shabby.
Not sure if it was a royal flush just yet, but at least it was a couple pair.
Yes.
So Kory, how about you?
Yeah, so a little bit about my story. I was born and raised in Oklahoma to about the age of 11. My mom was not in very stable relationships, had multiple men coming in and out of the door. I have 3 other siblings that I lived with at the time: an older brother, a younger brother, and a baby sister who's now 20. Basically, when I was 11, I moved to a town called Branson, Missouri in southwest Missouri. I was legally adopted by my aunt and uncle, who then were my legal guardians, who took care of me from 11 till the age I was 18. They provided security for me as far as going to school, having consistent parenthood. My uncle was a very good father figure in my life, and who taught me all of the Christian principles on what growing into manhood, transforming and going through the rite of passage of being a boy to manhood, how to be the head of the household, how to pray and take territory for the kingdom of God, not just in my personal life, but for the, I guess you could say, for lack of a better term, the greater good. He was a very good father figure in my life that I needed at the time that I was in need of security as far as like where I was going in life, and getting to come to know Jesus at such a young age that helped provide a lot of security for me. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about that, is because out of all the insecurities from being a child coming up to now, that's what I've been striving for and been working towards, in which I work in the security industry now. And that's one of the main reasons why I, decided to join the Marine Corps at, 17 years old. I had to get consent from, my aunt and uncle. They approved, thankfully. But I was just looking for security and, trying to be part of something greater than myself. So I saw that as something that I could be part of. And it was great for the time. It was.
So so clearly faith is an integral part of both your lives. Both of you are born again Christians. So when we talk of servant leadership, people can take on, it's somewhat of a more common phrase over the last, honestly, 15, 20 years. It's been used quite regularly. But I've heard people who don't profess to have any faith even use the word servant leadership. So that phrase, it may take on a different meaning for different people. So what does servant leadership mean to you? How do you embody servant leadership? And either one of you can answer.
Yeah, absolutely. So my vision of servant leadership was really portrayed to me the first time when we actually first met, because I, for so long, was around and surrounded by the wrong people, and people weren't necessarily seeking to be together with me as a friend first, or just going after your heart as an individual rather than trying to give and take. And he actually, before we were in any way, shape, or form close friends, even, like, he was in my platoon, and I would put myself in these situations because of how broken I was mentally, emotionally, physically. I wasn't making the right decisions. And he was the only one that would answer the phone at 3 a.m. when I would put myself in these really bad situations with strangers. And he would come and rescue me. He would come and save me, make sure I would get into my room safely, and really take care of me without ever expecting anything in return. And I really think that that embodies what it means to be a servant to somebody. It's you give wholeheartedly without that desire to, it's like a give and get transactional kind of thing. And that's really what drew me to him and why I wanted him in my life. And I actually, within the first couple weeks of us actually dating, I literally looked straight into his face and I was like, I want to marry you. Like that's literally what I said to him. And I knew so deep down in my heart that this was the first man that had ever wanted to serve me and love me and genuinely take care of me, not for what I could give him, but because he just genuinely cared about me.
Not to add a public service announcement, but it plays into something that friend first. So I've been listening to a podcast. I don't know if you guys or any of the listeners have ever heard of Grace Community Church up in L.A. and John MacArthur is the teaching pastor there. And there's a podcast called The Expositor, and Austin Duncan puts this on, and they just released season 3, episode 4. And it's specifically about friendship, and it gives the biblical definition, if you will, of friendship. And you just gave it, which is a true friend is really about me. Anybody who's my true friend, I'm investing in that person for them to be to use today's terms, would be a better version of themselves. To use a biblical term, to be grow in Christ, to be used by Christ. And you're right. So a lot of people have these relationships that are more acquaintances or friendships, or there's an ulterior motive, or it's okay. Well, if I become a friend with this person, this may get me something down the road. And that's it's a common too as well. Kory, I want to ask you. So it sounds to me, and forgive me if it's a little accurate, but it sounds to me that you were living your faith more actively when you joined the Marine Corps than you were. So I got saved on active duty, and so I was living a certain way, had a certain persona, lifestyle, till God got a hold of my heart, and that changed the course of my life and my career. But you coming in, with you talk about your adopted father who taught you the transition into manhood. Many of us, we don't have a manhood transition. To some, it's when I could drink a beer. To some, it's join the military. To some, it's first time I have sex. I mean, we just don't have in our culture that transition. So, how was as taking on a servant leadership mentality and then joining the Marine Corps? How big of a challenge was that for you?
To be honest, it was actually a really huge challenge. Because once I And it's a little accurate what you asked and how you're feeling about it, because once I actually um, stepped out from under the covering of my aunt and uncle, I actually kind of went down a route that was more so without Jesus, without God. But like the foundations of the Christ foundation, the foundations that which I had already been set in my heart, and concerning the Bible and all the leadership aspects and the faith aspects, I still had them without truly realizing it. And obviously, it reflected through myself and Chelsea meeting, from the situations that she would get into, and just me just giving, like, I guess you could say, sacrificing myself and just giving to her without expecting anything back, because I truly did. I cared about her, and I was just like, I don't want to see this before we got into a relationship. I was like, I don't want to see this Marine fail. And all of my other Marines, all of my peers, all of my subordinates, they all knew that. I would always tell them, hey, if you ever need anything, I'm here for you. We can talk about this. And I would never make it public, or it would always be personal. But they knew that, but they never came to me. The only one who came to me was Chelsea, because she saw the value that I brought to the table. And but yeah, it was a hard transition, because I didn't continue my faith really until we got out of the Marine Corps.
Yeah.
Sure. And that's not uncommon. Being a father of children, and maybe someday you guys will experience it. But you can even look at your life. At some point, being raised in the church, or coming to faith at a younger age, teenager, whatever, then going through youth group and what have you. But there comes a point that you do have to make your faith your own. You can't live under the faith of your parents. So what you're describing is completely normal and natural, and it's great that the influence that your parents had was such that you knew that there was something you could not continue in that line of work, or in that living that way. I was, and in my own experience, I didn't have too many struggles, or probably because when I was fortunate that when I came to Christ, I shortly thereafter made E5 and then transferred, and I went out of state, and so it was a little different, I think, back when I did it, just the environment and stuff too. Anyway, so you got out of the military. You both did 4 years, and you got out 4 years ago. So tell me just give me a short challenge or praise of your military experience. Give me something positive where maybe you saw servant leadership on display by somebody, not faith-based or anything. Doesn't have to be, but I'm sure that they're good leaders out there that you had. Just because somebody does 4 years in the service and gets out doesn't mean it was a negative experience or bad leadership. It's just nobody joins the service to do 30 plus years. You
Right.
join to do 4 years,
Right.
and more than half do their 4 and get out.
Yeah, and I actually have to just clarify a statement, because we didn't get to finish our full terms. So I was
Full
only in
enlistment,
for, I was only in for 2.5 almost. And then he was in for about 3
3 years
quarters,
and 9
basically.
months. Yeah.
And so that's something that we can get into maybe at another episode or a little later if you're open to that. And so just the type of servant leadership that I saw for myself personally, I witnessed one of my sergeants actually in my MCT training. He literally went to bat for me to defend me and like promote my name, to recommend me for honorman, actually for company honorman. I was guide in not just boot camp, but also at MCT, and
What's
I
MCT?
Marine combat training.
Thank you.
Yes. I forget that there's civilian and non-civilian listeners. So I was like, wait,
Yeah.
I have to break that down. But while I was there, I was still struggling with some hip injuries and ankle injury that had happened when I was at boot camp. But I still was guide, still did all the hikes, still did everything besides maybe one adventure. Really, I could only not do one hike. And they said that shouldn't be grounds for you not graduating just because you can't do one hike. You already know all the basic skills. You already know everything. Like, we're not going to hold you back because we want to get you into the fleet, basically. And so at one of our hikes, we were out at the range. It was in the evening, and he comes out and he's like, guide. I'm like, yes, Sergeant. He's like, get over here. We're doing an interview with the BC, and we're gonna,
Battalion commander,
and we're gonna do an interview with you. You got to answer these questions to see if you're gonna be company honorman. And they prepped me like a couple days before with maybe some type of leadership questions or anything. But I went there. First guy marched in, answered his questions in front of the panel. He marched out. I marched in, answered my questions, marched out. So it was between me and 4 other people. And then at the end of everything that happened with all the hikes, and they had announced the company honorman, he came up to me and he was like, hey, guide, you got company honorman. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, that's so amazing. But I couldn't feel joy in the moment because a lot of my subordinates, I guess you could say, that were a part of my platoon, they didn't see me as a real Marine just because I didn't do one of the hikes. And they actually booed me in front of the whole squad bay while we were cleaning weapons when he announced, because he was so excited for me. Like, he was like, let's go, guide, like, let's go Elvestad. That was my maiden name. But they actually booed me in the whole squad bay while we were cleaning our M240s. And that was, I think, the pivotal moment of where I was like, I don't want to succeed anymore, because if this is the type of response I'm going to get from people, then what does it even mean to be great at anything if I'm just going to get that type of response from people? So that's where him fighting for me, serving, and wanting to see me grow and succeed and pour into me, that's what I loved seeing. And then there was also the two coin of it. It's like, not every individual is going to be happy or joyful for you when you do succeed. So just be mindful of that and guard your heart and your mind and be ready for the haters, because they're going to come. They're everywhere.
Yeah, they come. Yeah, there's not as many. It's easy to focus on the negative. Even at higher up, I would go in leadership and seeing, I have to remind myself that, there is just, 5% that are doing the mistakes, 95% get it right. And it's unfortunately that 5% that takes up 95% of my time. And that's okay. Listen, I can handle it. So good deal. So, listen, first off, I just want to thank everybody who's been tuning in. And if you like what you're seeing, please go visit the Enlisted Leadership Foundation website and learn why we're building America's leaders. Check out the other podcasts that's out there. This is episode, I think, 33 that we're doing right now. And you could read in the notes below how to learn more about these two people. But we're coming up on the end of this first episode. So I'll tell you what we're going to do. We were talking ahead of time if we do one or two. And I think it's appropriate that we circle back here next week for a second episode, if you guys are good with that.
Absolutely.
So thank you, everyone, for tuning in today. I'm David Dearie with the Enlisted Leadership Foundation. You've been listening to Lead On, Lessons from Military Leaders with Chelsey and Kory. And we'll be back next week where we will finish and learn more about their experiences. We'll give Kory and Chelsey a chance to share about their businesses that they're pursuing right now, post their Marine Corps tours. And I promise, Kory, you'll get more time to talk. See you next week.
Great.
Produced by Podcast Architects.